Welcome to Custom Home Builder Solutions, also known as CHS, a job costing, full accounting, and profit management software designed specifically for the professional home builder. Hello again. In this video, we are going to continue our discussion about the chart of accounts. And I'll click this in just a second, but first I'd like to have you notice that we are in a different company than we were before. The last one was called Brand New Builder or something. But I wanted to open something that had balances and has had activity, etc. Because when we open the chart of accounts, it will gather all the current balances in the chart of accounts for us, and we can drill down on those, which I'll mention again. Etc. And so I wanted to have those there so that we can demonstrate some other things. There are now balances when we open it that are due to the fact that we have paid some bills, we posted deposits, we may have made journal entries, we may have posted some payroll. Who knows, that now is causing balances to be in their chart of accounts. And I want to mention, I'm going to switch out here in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and click the chart of accounts to open it. And in the previous video, the first part of this video, we talked about marking various accounts as cash accounts. And you can see that here, where they're marked as cash accounts. On your Company Master, and in our previous videos about Company Master, there is a place where you can select which one of these. Like I imagine we might have cash construction checking selected as the most commonly used cash account. In other words, when you go to print checks, it will already supply that. If you want to select that as a default on your Company Master, this cash account will be supplied, and you'll need to pay attention to that and change it if you are posting a check for maybe the operating checking, etc. I just wanted to be sure that I mentioned that. Now these numbers might change here in a second because I'm jumping back to my older video, so I don't have to redo all of this video. I'm just redoing this one because our home and our menu has changed. So hang on a second. So you'll notice here in the previous video we talked about how you could set up group sections. This actually has a whole lot more accounts and various things differently than the one we were using before, and it really was initially loaded from the NAHB recommended chart of accounts. But you'll notice these things in black are group headings that we were setting up, and we talked about how the section, the financial section, current assets, and if you scroll down and look for another one in blue, you'll see fixed assets. Those financial sections are supplied by CHS, and you can't change those, but you'll see the total of the whole financial section here in blue. You will also be seeing, and we're going to have our next video is going to start talking about entering your balance forwards from a previous set of books, but you can see that the balance forward date that we set and the balances that were entered when you put in your previous set of books. This helps when you're initially setting up your balance forwards to be able to see those there. But you can also see how there's this group for property, plant, and equipment and how it's summed up, and then you'll see the next group and how it's summed up. And if I click this, what we were looking at before for setting up financial headings, again, I just want to emphasize that financial headings and the numbers used there are for sorting and grouping and have nothing to do with the account number. But if you look here, you can see that section, current assets, you can see cash, you can see short-term investments, you can see receivables. You can see how these are not your accounts on your chart of accounts, but these are headings that you're setting up and controlling as you like for financial statements. I have just jumped back for a second to our newer version, and I'm going to click this now about reports and financials info because I want to show you how these group headings and divisions happen on financial statements. And if you click that and do accounting transactions, ledgers, or financials, it's going to give you information, which I'm going to show you, so I didn't leave it there very long, about where you go to get financials. But if you go home, what you can look for is general ledgers and financials. And what I'm going to click on is the financial statements to open the financial statements window. But if I expand the area for balance sheet and just leave today's date, And I print a balance sheet, and it will first open it as an HTML that you can send to Excel, and you would want to get it exported to PDF if you plan to print it and do much of anything with it. But what I wanted to talk about is those group headings that you set up are controlling which order these things are displayed, these groups are displayed on your balance sheets, which order they're displayed, and by setting up a group it says I want a subtotal for that group and a subtotal for that group. So you can see how that is on your balance sheet and how your group headings are controlling how these are displayed under what section you tell it to display in. If you collapse this for balance sheets, etc. Also, if you just run a quick trial balance, I won't collapse that yet, but you'll see how it's grouping by those group headers then all of a sudden. It's just the groups on the trial balance and showing what your balances are in the accounts today, all the way through all of your accounts. We'll come back and discuss definitions a little bit more about that. And income statements, if I do, this is a really old set of books. I don't know if I have what I have in 2002, but let's hope I have something. Maybe not, but and you do an income statement. There is some, we do have a sales in here. Also, this is still those group headers, and you're assigning these accounts to that particular group, and you're controlling which order these groups are displayed in on something like an income statement like this. And so those are those group headers. I just wanted you to see them in action for a second. Let's get back to our chart of accounts. The other thing that, like I said, you're seeing here are balances. And there's a little tip here about positive balances are debits, negative balances are credits. And if you know anything about accounting, double set books, double entry books, means you have a debit and a credit, for most every transaction. To keep your books in balance, your books should total to 0. So all of these summed up are shown over here to 0. If there's any reason this is not 0, CHS is going to start telling you about it. There shouldn't be much reason because CHS controls you as far as keeping your books in balance, but we do just in case there's some little issue. We have a place to troubleshoot. We have a place to click and look and see what our latest entry date was, the last entry we ever made in our accounting, the latest date, and that's what this latest balance is based on, showing here. You can always do trial balances, etc. for other dates, but when this chart of account opens, it just shows the latest balances in these accounts. But anyway, negative balances are credit. Normal balances for liabilities, equity, or sales income accounts are credits. In other words, they will normally be a negative, look like a negative balance, but if it's a liability account, equity, or sales income, that's a normal balance for it. Like you can look down here let's get down to those liabilities. Our current accounts payable is $79,256. That's correct right here. In other words, it really does mean there's a total due of $79,256. It doesn't mean that just the fact that it's sort of a negative credit doesn't mean somebody owes us something or something. It's normal to have credit balances under liabilities, credit balances under long-term liabilities. This means we have retained earnings of 142 because it's a normal balance. That really actually in your head is sort of a positive amount. And sales, it always seems backwards to people, but this does mean this is what your sales are, even though it shows a minus, but we're showing them that way so they will total to 0 as they should for a balanced set of books. Once you set up your chart of accounts, you can do some reports of it. And I'd like to show you, you could do your basic chart of accounts. You might do this, send it to Excel for starting to work on your balances forward that you need to get into CHS if you want. And if you export to PDF, it'll be in double columns. So you could do that report just to see where you're at. The chart of accounts with notes means, let's close this for a minute. Let's decide we want to write just because we're wanting to have some notes about what we're using an account for, maybe on direct construction costs, we type some notes about this account is used to post job costs as work in progress until a job is closed. We're going to come back in a second and talk about, and I clicked submit edits and post edits, and I clicked this pencil edit icon to edit it. You won't see anything here after it refreshes about that, but if I print the chart of accounts with notes, which also could give you room to scribble on it, and we get down to that 1430 account, you can see how those notes are there about what that account is used for. And you could do that just for information. If somebody's printing that out and trying to figure out what accounts to use on your chart of accounts to post things, sometimes the notes can help. One thing I'd like to point out is, I pointed it out before, but when you're setting up your chart of accounts, you do not need to set up accounts for each job. You also should not confuse these with cost codes. Cost codes are things used for subsidiary job cost reports that you'll be using when you post things like bills that are job costs. They're things like your framing, plumbing, air conditioning, planned costs, and you can watch all the other help. This is a job costing program, and those cost codes should not be confused with account numbers for accounting on your chart of accounts. So for posting all those job costs, most every custom home builder that's on a completed contract method of accounting and uses the NHB chart of accounts posts almost all their job costs to something called direct construction costs in a section called work in progress. And it is not necessary to set an account up for each job here. That's because if you drill down to see the data behind that balance, CHS is a database that is set up so that the job is stored in a different field than the GL number. Therefore, CHS can comb through and produce various financial statements just for one job, cash flow for one job cost reports from your accounting from one job, that kind of thing, and your various cost codes that you're using are in a whole other field. So you do not need to junk up your chart of accounts by setting up. You can see if you go back to the financials, each account for each job, and I'm going to click this to expand this. We have one very valuable tool here that's a trial balance with job sums. And so you can see here that 1430 account is showing how much is in that account for each job that we have set up over here. You can drill down to see how much. This is a tool to help do some reconciliation behind a video, but the report is pretty handy. I'm always talking about at the end of each month. Print this, see how much is in work in progress for each job. If there's some closed jobs showing up here, you probably want to go to do some editing. You can drill down to see the detail behind that number, of the job costs, etc. But because of that, you'll see we just have one account for 1430. We do not have to set up a bunch of accounts for each job, because CHS is going to be able, since you choose job codes when you enter things, it's going to be able to comb through your database to show you how much is in there for each job. Let me think here, the other reports. We'll talk about this one when you're doing your balance forwards. If you want this chart of accounts with those latest balances that you see on screen, you can print a report of that too, which is essentially a trial balance as of today, which you can also get under the financials. So that's what's going on this screen over here. This area over here, balance forward sum, we will be talking about when we're talking about balance forwards. What I'd like to talk about again, and I mentioned it in the first video, is one of the things that you will need to do, one of the first things you'll need to do before doing balance forwards actually is you need to decide on what your balance forward date is, and you'll be clicking this. We'll talk about that again, and set it so that CHS will know
what entries, based on the date you use, whether it's a prior period entry or a current entry, etc. We'll talk about that a little more. But after you get your chart of accounts set up, if you set up your own chart of accounts, before you do any entry of records into your accounting database, you need to tell CHS which accounts to use when it's doing various types of things. For example, and please read this over here, I won't take up all of your time. You could pause the video and look at it. You could also print help and click the help, and you'll see some help here for your various control accounts. You can also watch a video about a couple of things that go with one of those control accounts. So that's help for the accounts that way, for all of that. And let's open that control accounts again. What will happen is CHS will give you a drop down of just, in this case, accounts payable, just accounts that you've put in the liabilities, current liabilities section to select from, to tell us which account you want to use for accounts payable. When you post a bill, you might be posting, an office supplies or a job cost bill, and using some GL account from your chart of accounts for that, like office supplies or direct construction costs. But CHS is going to keep your books in balance and post. When you tell it to submit, it's going to go on its own and submit the offsetting entries to keep your books in balance to accounts payable. And so it needs to know which account you want to have CHS use for that. Same thing when you're doing accounts receivable, you might post some little sales income and use that kind of account when you're setting up your accounts receivable entry. But then CHS will post an offset to accounts receivable on your chart of accounts, so it needs to know which one. If you set up some vendors to give you purchase discounts, this one isn't used really as much anymore, but when you're posting bills, it will detect that the vendor offers a purchase discount, and it will look here to drop the, to look for this GL account to post those discounts too. But when you're entering bills, you can actually, right now they have this earned discounts selected, and you can get a little explanation about each one of these and how they're used by clicking the question mark button. There is a feature in CHS for cash/profit transfer clearing. In other words, it'll figure out how much money you've earned on a job, the profit that you've earned on a job. It will check to see if you transferred any of that profit to an overhead account. It's a feature you do or do not have to use. You do not have to use, but it's really handy for people who like to move cash out of their construction checking to their overhead that they've actually earned. And CHS needs to know what account you're going to use. This account 1099, the profit transfer account, should always end up being 0 when you use those features. But it needs to put some stuff in and out there to track how much you've already transferred and see if you have the money, enough money to do transfers. There's whole help information about profit transfers in other areas of the program. Paid voucher clearing cash account is needed, and it will be supplied when you load, and you'll need to keep it there. It's like a transfer account also, because if somebody outside goes and pays for a job cost but you're wanting to record that in CHS, CHS is going to use this account really as the cash account, and it's actually going to go in and out so that it does not have any effect to your books. And CHS is set up to do that, and you can go to payables and learn a lot more about paid voucher clearing, but it needs to know which account to use in case you set up your own chart of accounts. This has to do with the fact that sometimes, hardly ever is this used, that there's a video about using it if you're wanting to post your accounts receivable as if you're on a cash basis and not recognize income on your accounts receivable invoices until you actually receive the deposit. Please watch the video that's about this and you'll see why that's needed. These down here, and we'll be talking about these more in the next video about setting up your balance forwards, but you might have some open accounts payable on your balance forwards from your other set of books, and we are going to have you post those to an account called prior period accounts payable. And if you've set up your own chart of accounts, you're going to need to set up one for CHS to use for this, because we're going to use it when you first do your balance forwards. You're going to put it there, but then we're going to tell you about how to post the detail of those open invoices, bills that you're going to need to pay, and it's going to start clearing this account and putting it to accounts payable in CHS. Same basic concept for prior period open accounts receivable if you have open receivables invoices. And again, please watch the next videos about these prior periods after we talk about balance forwards. And there's also a prior period cash account, and that's actually used if you decide you're going to post a prior period deposit because you want it to show up on job revenues in detail for jobs in progress. CHS is actually going to just post that in and out of this account. This account will end up being zero all the time. But just so it can show up on some subsidiary reports, it will post one side to a job and the other side not to a job, but so that 1090 stays clear, but it can pick up the side that's for the job for job revenues reports. Again, read the help, look at these question mark buttons. I did just want to talk about setting up these control accounts. If they are not set up and you try to go do an accounts payable bill, CHS will tell you that you need to set up the control accounts for these things, and you will only do this once when you're first setting up CHS. You will tell it, most especially, CHS will load all these for you if you load the NAHB or the simpler one we talked about, and you really won't have to worry about it. But if you set up your very own chart of accounts, you're going to need to tell CHS which accounts to use to do these various functions. Let me think if there was anything else I needed to talk about. I don't think so on this video. We are then going to get started on, we set up our chart of accounts. We're going to get started in entering balance forwards from your previous set of books if you need to do that. And thank you for watching.